June 2018. I had just turned 16 years old a few months prior. I was prescribed Lexapro after having gone to the mental hospital for the first time. After the extremely traumatic experience of being in the mental hospital, I was subsequently prescribed Lexapro, as my case was seen as significantly more difficult than other depressed patients they had seen in the past. My nurse at the time that I had told him that I was prescribed Lexapro, after having been told it was strong by the psychiatrist there, remarked, "Oh, that's a good one." It turned out to be quite stronger than I had intended the effect to be, or hoped, rather. By the time I got home, I wanted nothing to do with other people. I didn't want to speak to anyone. I spent several days speaking nonstop to catch up with my boyfriend and my friends at the time, and soon after all of that, I dipped off the face of the earth, got onto a separate account, and only spoke to my boyfriend sporadically throughout the day, rather than all the time like we had been doing before. I spent most of this time now creating videos in an entirely new style, videos that went against the governing philosophy of my channel up to that point. This was the beginning of Infinite Outlaw, or as you would call them now, Star. I started making videos on being isolated, depression, not wanting to go outside, all the while reviewing the multiple anime I was watching. It was like I was able to watch a series every day all of a sudden. And at this point, I was no longer just prescribed Lexapro. The therapist referred me to a psychiatrist. At this point, I was going to outpatient therapy, and they put me on an antipsychotic called Latuda. As all of this was going on, I could see myself having more and more trouble sleeping, or that as I would try to get to sleep, I would feel immense discomfort and depression, a kind that I was not used to seeing while laying in bed, a sort of dysphoria that I was not used to in the waves of dysphoria that I constantly felt. It was at this time that my isolation became much more pronounced. I did nothing but watch anime, make videos. There was no other motivation in my mind outside of perhaps looking at image boards. I didn't want to do anything else. And at the time, it seemed kind of like paradise, because there was no feeling or inclination towards the idea of speaking to other people. And I could fully envelop myself into things that I enjoyed. It was only when I was forced to move out of the home that I was in August of that year, that I began to see some disastrous side effects. I already developed the feeling that I had mania of some kind, because since having taken these medications, I started experiencing mania. But I never experienced a full-on psychotic episode. Not until that point. It was then that I had been convinced that the entirety of my family was going to kill me, locked myself in a room, and refused to go out, as I was hearing the voices in my head scream at the top of their lungs. I was terrified. I had not experienced anything like that up to this point. And if I were to guess, it was most likely the Lexapro that caused this, as there is no evidence to suggest that an atypical antipsychotic like Latuda can. I became hypersensitive to the situations that I was in, not just manic and more psychotic, not just experiencing those symptoms more intensely than I ever had, or experiencing them for the first time in the case of mania. I was fully on edge, experiencing thoughts about manipulation and harming other people that I had not experienced before. It was here that my personality entirely changed, and with the next medicine cocktails that I took over the course of my medicated life during primarily this year, but for somewhat of 2019 as well, throughout 2020 I've taken no medicine essentially, besides stuff for sleep that I was prescribed on a whim, that I continued experiencing heinous psychological effects that continued to alter my personality in ways that I was not fond of. Risperidone in particular, aside from making me shake constantly and making my body have these constant uncontrollable movements, gave me some of the worst homicidal thoughts that I had experienced, besides haloperidol. That was pretty terrifying. I just wanted to kill people all the time, and I was unable to feel any sort of pleasure. Prozac did absolutely nothing for me, besides increase manic and psychotic symptoms, and I could say more or less the same of just about every other antidepressant, besides the ones that only gave me anhedonia and only gave me erectile dysfunction. Throughout all of these different medicine changes, I felt as if I was going crazy. I would go onto Discord for the time that I was using Discord and say things that would appear as if I were going crazy. I look at myself now, seeing that the only quote-unquote big argument I had was in August of last year, and it was over some nonsense like the Hong Kong protests, only to subsequently make amends with the person I was in the argument with, and have never had an argument with anyone since that time. It makes me think that I am gone from being incredibly inconsistent to absurdly consistent, not in terms of my worldview or beliefs, but in terms of my behavior, that you can always more or less expect a certain reaction from me, that you don't need to expect me to cause a huge stir just for no reason. I think public beef is slightly different. Yoshika Miyako Red, case in point, I just sort of called him out in a very memey, dishonest, strange video, but besides sort of causing public beef with him just for the sake of being a pro wrestling character, I basically haven't gotten into any arguments. I've just been very calm with everyone who I'm speaking to. Even when I'm absurdly angry, I've remained very calm, or have taken on a more mimetic persona of just messing with the person. I remember there was one server where I was in, where I just started presenting myself as an incredibly nihilistic antinatalist, which, I mean, you could think of my channel and think, well, that how is that being me, or how is that saying anything that's different from what you already believe? Well, I presented it in a particularly sociopathic and genocidal way, and the point of me doing this to this person in this incredibly annoying political discord was not to defend any idea that I made previously, because I knew if I made arguments with substance to them about the point that he disagreed upon, I would never be able to get through to him. That he was so arrogant that anything I said was never going to amount to anything. What I wanted to do was sort of turn the joke onto him by turning the joke onto me, using myself as a vehicle to just bewilder and confuse him, to make him upset. And so, I sort of presented myself as this much worse person than I actually was, by just making very dishonest statements at my own expense and working him up, upsetting him. upsetting, subsequently, everyone in the room. And the joke was on them. I wanted them to feel distress, to feel like their worldview, that if you just create a system where every person is participating, that where every person is taken care of, or rather the largest majority, there's always going to be a person who's an outlier. And so that's why you can't build systems like that are meant to siphon people into these groups, because when you do, you inevitably have outliers whose lives are being dictatorially controlled because of your own ethical code. And to govern other people's lives based on your preferences is inevitably going to be the essence of authoritarianism. To believe that you understand what consists of a good life for another person better than they do, that is authoritarianism. That's taking the subjective experience away, that's taking the choice away from the person, that's disrespecting their ability to rationally govern their own life as an adult, even if that means potentially doing dangerous things from every now and again, and putting that agency onto yourself, the dictator. That was the point of me pretending to be someone much more sinister than I actually was, because it poked holes in the idea that their perfect system could work for everyone. Those are the only instances I can think of where I appeared particularly insane, and only one of them was not entirely performative. And so, looking at myself now, unmedicated and restrained, I can't imagine going insane anymore. Everything here stays the same.